Yeah, I agree with that. I think, you know, one of the things that I'll just say I started as a render wrangler before, and you know that helped me move into the pipeline TD role. And sorry about my lighting here, but being able to effectively communicate like technical issues, even later on, like recently I had the role of pipeline supervisor, where I was basically supervising the pipeline for a particular project and ensuring that any specific technical issues they had were addressed, and things were working smoothly. And I heard that feedback a lot, that, you know, that they appreciated that I could take like what the technical teams were doing and come back to them and sort of like relay the information. And same thing back to from the production side, kind of drilling down on what their issues are and taking it back to the tech teams is really important. Also, and maybe, I don't know if it goes without saying, but Python, most of VFX pipeline is written in Python. C++ can be handy too, and there's a few other languages, but Python, more and more knowing machine learning is really helpful. You know, even if you aren't interested in working with it, I think knowing how it works, all the basics, it's becoming more and more prevalent. And same with cloud, knowing the basics of like what the cloud is, how that works, can be really helpful.
So we mentioned some soft skills and some hard skills there, and it's actually a very hard question to ask. What skills are on demand, because the breadth of amount of different careers that exist in VFX from the pipeline side is, you know, quite broad. Like, for example, some people probably are thinking about doing support or writing scripts in Maya and Blender, et cetera, for various pipelines. And then there's other people on the more core pipe side, like Ryan here, who works on the platform team, I want to say right now. Ryan, you're always moving around. Do you want to talk a little about those kinds of roles?
Sure, yeah. I mean, my journey also started as a render wrangler and building tools, but I sort of, like every new job that I took, stepped one more step away from kind of production hands-on. I was doing DevOps at ImageWorks for a little while, and now my role platform at ILM. So that's a lot of, like, you know, I often tell people that I build tools for the people who build tools for the artists. So it's like, and just that extra step, right, of dealing with the same kinds of work, right? I write a lot of Python. I write a lot of Rust now, which I enjoy. Do a lot of service deployments, but the actual workflows that we're building are much more focused on what developers will do. So, you know, what the pipe TDs need, and sort of the way that they distribute code. And but there's tons of roles like that. You know, my team also maintains our render farm, which we have a proprietary one. There's some really deep technical problems that happen in that space. There's also a lot of really interesting bugs that come up, but we also don't deal directly with shows all that often. So it's kind of a very different experience, and different application of the same skills, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. And Dan, when you're looking at resumes and various things, what skills are you looking for?
Well, I mean, I think that the point that was made about communication is a great one, and that's not always easy to show on a resume, but it is a really important skill for people to have. I think, you know, obviously we look for certain software skills like Python, Linux experience. Most of the places that I've worked at have been Linux based, so kind of knowing your way around a shell, I think, is important. But it's also good, I think, if people have some experience with artistic tools like Blender or Maya or Houdini. Not that you have to make amazing art with them, but just at least to know what they are and how they work, because you will be working with artists. You know, it's not pure, like, movie production is not pure software development. It's really an artistic thing. So having exposure to some of those things is important. In terms of software, USD is becoming, or is already obviously, a very big deal for people to know about. But yeah, I think showing that you can work on a team and that you have good communication skills is really important for sure.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting, a valuable point there, Dan, too, about like this sort of desire to learn how things work and crack things open, right? As much as like we have all these tools that artists use, and it's one thing to use them, but as people in pipeline, normally we're coming in from the other side, from underneath, right, and trying to script them and things like that. And so having that sense of exploration to go into those applications and learn the APIs, or just try learning the APIs, right? Understanding a little bit how they work and how you can make them do things that they don't do out of the box. And then, beyond that, outside of the application, right? It's like a lot of pipeline tools is just doing the same thing for our workstations, right? Writing tools and scripts that move files around and manage things, but kind of automating it and having that sense of, I don't know, wanting to know how it works and hacking through it. It's
kind of a curiosity about it for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I will say for the roles I've hired for in the past, like one big thing is also like, excitement about the role. And, one of the teams I supervised, we used Unreal Engine a lot. So we were hiring Unreal engineers. A lot of them were game developers, but, what I was really looking for was someone who was interested in solving interesting problems. So I think just sort of showing that you're interested in solving problems, that's a really big thing for me. Whether or not you even know the answer in the interview, just kind of like talking through like what your thought process is and how you would approach solving it would really tell us a lot.
I think there's a lot to be said for being able to do archaeology. A lot of these pipelines can, depending on where you're at, be many, many years old. Some of the software packages, it's great to have some experience with an existing content creation tool like Maya, but depending on where you go, sometimes you may encounter a software package that is only available inside the four walls of the studio, right? And there's no documentation. You can't Google for it. And it's about being able to dig into code really quickly, especially on the support side. I would sometimes get tickets for something that was broken in an area of code that I had never seen before. So I had to learn how it worked really quickly, talk to the artists using it, find an expert in that area of the code base, and get it resolved really quickly. So I think in addition to programming, I think a lot of the role is diplomacy and archaeology. So
Cool. So we got two surprise panelists. Oliver was having some trouble joining. So and also we have Amy Moorcraft here, who I want to pose the same question to specifically, because she's worked on the recruiting side, and is the talent manager for the Jedi Academy at ILM. I think that's right. So Amy, quick intro. Course. Yeah, so Amy, you've screened a lot of applications for tech, and you've done a lot of screening interviews for tech as well. And I wanted to pose what things do you look for when you're trying to recruit for these roles at different levels? Thank you so much, Amy. I had to pose the question to you because you're here and I knew your role, so perfect person to ask. Also joining us, we have Oliver Dunn. He was having some AV issues, connecting to the meet, but is here now. So hi, Oliver. Do you want to give a quick introduction about who you are, your role, and welcome to the panel?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks, James. And apologies. Yeah, I was unexpectedly in a location I wasn't expecting, and I didn't have my laptop with me, hence on the phone and trouble getting connected. But I'm here, which is great. So my name's Oliver Dunn. I'm pipeline supervisor at former Animal Logic and now at Netflix Animation Studios. And yeah, we've been spending the last few years kind of merging those two pipelines together to form us into the place that we are now. And yeah, I could probably reiterate what Melissa and Will said there about like problem solving and archaeology, and especially for an old pipeline such as one with Animal Logic that's been like active and ongoing for like nearly 30 years. There's an awful lot of old code that one has to go through, and it's almost like the thrill of the chase to an extent of like that putting on your Sherlock Holmes hat and like really digging in and like having to go through layers of kind of old libraries to find the issue that came up. And often it might not actually be a code change that's required. When you dig down and then you find that it's like, oh, just because that person put that setting there and this fragile old code wasn't expecting it. So just get them to change that setting, and then off they go with resolving whatever it was, like a broken render or a character cache not working or things like that. So that's, for me, that's like finding that kind of energy and enthusiasm in the thrill of the chase of trying to the excitement of like trying to solve and find and solve problems. I'd say is a key one to look for in interviews here.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I want to move the conversation on a little bit here. So something that, personally I've been thinking about lately a lot is using open source as a starting point to learn about the industry, to contribute to some projects. And I just want to get your guys' thoughts about, getting your feet wet in VFX through open source.
I can start, I suppose, as I form my thought here. I think everyone should get involved in open source in some way. I think my opinion on open source specifically for VFX is that it can actually be quite intimidating. I think the not unfortunate reality, but the reality I think of the current kind of open source VFX world is that a lot of what has been open source is like really foundational libraries, which is amazing for us as an industry, but they're not always the most approachable, I think, for junior developers necessarily. The projects, they put a lot of effort into making categorizing issues and having good issues as starting points and things like that. I think the only reason I say that is like, thinking back to myself in university, was I really going to jump in and start trying to understand the OpenEXR code base? Maybe, and if I'm interested, you definitely should, do that. I think as an expectation, it's probably unrealistic for a lot of people. But there are tons of other open source projects. I think it's sort of like, if you have a passion, regardless of what that passion is, there's always a project you can contribute to. And I think any of that experience with any project out there is still going to be just as valuable as any other. If that makes sense.
I'm so glad you said that, because ahead of this meeting, I was thinking about the Academy Software Foundation and all the open source tools that we have as an industry. And I was like, which one would I recommend? And then jumping into OpenQ by yourself as a junior would be pretty hard, all these different things. So I agree. I think maybe there are other open source packages you could contribute to. I think in general it's a good idea, because if you are applying for a job and you can say, here's my GitHub, and you can see the projects I've contributed to, you can see that I know how to look at tickets and address issues, submit code review and merge request, and it's just sort of like a portfolio piece that you can have. So not to mention just experience in kind of understand, like, no, it is like how it is in, you know, when you start working. So but yeah, I agree. Some of those projects may be a bit intimidating to start with, but I will say at Digital Domain, we do use a lot of those projects. You know, Open Color IO, Open Image IO. We're looking into moving to OpenQ now. So yeah, we do love them.
I will chime into the panel here and say that a lot of the ASWF projects are intimidating, but there are issues within those projects that are a bit more approachable. I see that Sylvia mentioned dev days in the comments there. And if you're interested in contributing to open source, taking a look at ASWF's dev days is a great idea. A lot of the project maintainers will tag certain issues in GitHub as, you know, something being approachable. I did dev days for the first time last year, and, you know, I hadn't really touched C++ too much, but I got my feet wet in it. And it was a really good feeling to actually be able to contribute to something, to a big project like Open Timeline IO. Moving on the conversation here, because I don't want to get hung up on this topic, if that's okay with you guys. I would like to ask about various resources for aspiring developers. I know there was a little bit of conversation in the pre-call about that, and I would love to have that conversation broadcast here and get your thoughts on it, Will, as well as everybody else on the panel, of what resources exist.
Sure. Yeah, I can start off here. I think it's important to understand kind of filmmaking as a whole as well, so you understand the context of what you're actually building software to help out with. I like books, so I have a couple books. This is the book I use in my class, Production Pipeline Fundamentals. It's a good overview. It's not very, it's more organizational and kind of less technical, so it gives you an idea of just how to organize things. Blaine Brown's cinematography is just a really good introduction into what happens, not just the artistic side of cinematography, but also how things happen on set and how things will be delivered to you in post. And then the VES standards guide is just like solid end-to-end production pipeline for film. To Dan's point earlier about knowing Linux, I know sometimes that could be kind of tricky if you just have a Windows machine at home. One of the things that I do in my pipeline class is I recommend that students install Git for Windows, and it comes with Git Bash. So it allows you to start getting used to working in a Linux-like environment without having to go through the process of dual booting your machine, for example. And I think it can be a little less intimidating if you're just jumping in. So, yep. Those were some of, the VES, the Visual Effects Society, also on their website has a very useful glossary. There can be a lot of terminology that can also be very, very intimidating to approach. They have a very, very complete glossary. So if you encounter some term or jargon that you haven't encountered before, it's really great. So I'll throw it to the rest of the panel if anyone else has anything else.
Awesome. I'll also flag. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I'll just quickly flag the this organization, right, the Digital Production Pipeline Association, and the events that we run. Just being here, I think is a good thing, and we have an amazing community of people. Obviously, many of you are already involved. If this is your first or one of your first kind of times joining us, definitely stay in touch. We're all very nice people. We love to have everyone around and keep these conversations going. So I know of at least a few roles that have existed through these channels. So
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that's what I was going to flag, the Discord. Also, if you're looking for something more foundational like programming, really recommend a book called The Pragmatic Programmer. I think that should be required reading for anybody who writes code. It's a great book. Moving on here. So the first 90 days in any job is intimidating, especially going into VFX. I remember my first 90 days getting just a whirlwind of information. So I'd like to ask the panel, what can someone expect in the first 90 days on the job? Let's start with you, Oliver. What do you think? What can someone expect?
Well, I think first of all, there's a lot of onboarding that goes on, and I think it depends on the department or your own personal manager and like what run of things like that team has. I know in our pipeline we have different groups for like assets and lighting and and things like that, and they do tend to have like a different run of things depending on the group that they go into. But yeah, it starts with just getting onboarded into all of the different applications so that you're familiar with whether it's Jira or whatever the ticketing system is, and then Slack or whatever messaging system it is, and then just one by one kind of getting familiar with all of these systems, and then you'll probably get given like an initial support ticket, something that is non-critical and it's somewhat isolated so it's not something that's going to go down a rabbit hole of some things too deeply, but something that will just allow you to get into a development environment, so learn how to download your code and then get it into a buildable environment, set up a staging environment so that then when you do make changes, you can then go and test them in a certain area. If it's like, changing a tool in Maya or something like that, to be able to kind of confirm that, you are able to make the changes and then see them happen. And then going through your first pull request, and so getting your code reviewed by someone else, I know can be like really intimidating as like the very first time that you go through that. But that is I don't know, I was going to say like a rite of passage, but I don't know whether that's the right thing to say or not. But yeah, that's kind of like the first, that would be the first 2 weeks, I would say, is getting your first like support ticket off your belt and having the first ticket done. And then from there, it's just a gradual, like a bigger ticket into more things, maybe getting involved in a development project and something that's been scheduled a bit more critical to get involved with, and yeah, just slowly building up like that.
Awesome. And Dan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what Oliver said absolutely makes sense. I think what's also interesting is that at different studios, pipeline can mean a different thing. So it's not always exactly the same. At some places, it's considered more of a pure software role. At ImageWorks, a lot of pipeline TDs are in a more of a shot support role, so like a show support. So you'll be thrown, a lot of the same things will happen. You'll still be getting tickets, but you may be debugging a scene that an animator is working on. You may be in that kind of scenario where you have to recreate someone's workflow and figure out where it's breaking, and figure out what the fix is. But yeah, also there's just a lot of archaeology, a lot of figuring out how things work. It's not always obvious. There's not always documentation. It can take a while. Something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with is that when they come in, they'll want to make a really big change. They'll see something that they see as an inefficiency, and they'll be like, I want to make a really big change here. I think I can help the whole studio right away, week one. This is my great idea. And it's the hard truth is often there's a reason why that inefficiency exists, because there's so much interconnected departments and people, and you change one thing over here and it breaks something way over there. So you have to kind of hold back a little bit and learn why things work the way they work. And then eventually you can start building on that to something bigger. Yeah.
I really think giving yourself the space to learn and giving yourself the permission to learn, I think, is really important. It can be a fire hose of information, especially depending on the size of the studio. It was a big jump for me moving from DreamWorks to ILM, where at DreamWorks I was a department pipeline TD, and so I was writing tools for a single department. Moving over to ILM in San Francisco, you could get a ticket from literally any department, right? So, and that's incredibly intimidating, but this is a job for people who love learning, and you're going to continue to learn. When I moved into a supervisor role, I had to start being able to speak intelligently to decisions around something like color science, which is an incredibly tricky specialization in our field. And I basically had to cram a lot of new knowledge about this specialization. So you're going to continue to learn. And when you enter the field, I think you just have to keep telling yourself it's okay to not know everything. That helped me.
Yeah, I was going to just bounce back on that and kind of spark from what Dan said there about remaining curious rather than like feeling that you think that you should know something, or that you think that you should try and dive in really early and try and prove yourself. And just trying to stay over on that side of curiousness will be much more well received and respected, rather than thinking that you know something and trying to prove yourself early on. Like, just keep being as curious as possible, asking and asking. And I don't think any manager will ever be sick of a new starter saying, like, stop asking questions. Like, that's just that won't happen. So yeah, just really stick on that side of curiosity.
Yeah, actually, it was going to be my advice as well, as what to do in the beginning is ask a lot of questions. And I'm super grateful for when I started, we were working in the office. So like the person next to me was endlessly helpful. I asked him a lot of questions, and then, and same as well, the first time I was moving into a supervisor role, my supervisor at the time told me, don't be afraid to ask questions, like, just, and I think I actually have gotten even better at that as a supervisor, because like needing to speak to the decisions we're making. And I kind of almost wish that all along I had that level of not being afraid to ask questions. I wish from the start. So yeah, I would agree with that. Ask questions.
I think too, to bring it back to your original question of like, what does the first 90 days look like? In my experience, to what Oliver said, like the first 2 weeks is pretty predictable. And then after that, you don't know anything. But it's often what I find with these roles is like, pretty much we always have too much work to do, and that's also probably why you got hired, right? Is to do some of this work. And so often what happens is like for the first month, you feel like you have nothing to do and you're not being helpful, and you're just trying to like get things working and plug things together. And then probably by the time 90 days hits, you'll be so deep down like 3 different rabbit holes at the same time, and just kind of never look back, and you'll never get things done that you thought you were going to get done. And it's just like this kind of endless amount of work. And I feel like that's roughly the time range for me, for each of the positions that I've had, at least, where it feels slow. And then lo and behold, you have too much to do. And it's never what you thought it was going to be, not for the better or for the worse, just unpredictable.
Yeah, I'm going to say my first 90 days after transitioning from a technical assistant to a pipe TD, I annoyed the heck out of Will on this panel. He probably got sick of seeing my face come over the cubicle wall, me bugging him every 10 minutes about something. But yeah, you're relying on your mentors is really great, and having a great mentor makes all the difference. So.
To that point, I think in general, by and large, my experience has been people in this industry love sharing knowledge. I think it's been a very rare occurrence where I feel like someone has been very has not wanted to talk about what they are excited about. So I think it's really important to take advantage of the resources around you. And if you are hitting a wall, especially if you're like spinning your wheels on something, finding an expert. One of my supervisors at DreamWorks always pushed like the 15-minute rule, right? Where you would give yourself a time box to work in, to start doing research, be able to equip yourself with enough knowledge that you can ask some intelligent questions. And then if you still don't know, reaching out and finding an expert, because I think, especially when you're starting out, spinning your wheels way too long, I think, is almost as bad as kind of throwing up your hands immediately and saying, I don't know, and then talking to someone else. So
I didn't spin my wheels that long, Will. But anyway, so we're actually going to open up to questions from the audience now. So if you go down to the bottom right of your Google Meet, you'll see options menu to get to the Q&A section. If you click that, you'll see Q&A. You can click on that, and then you can ask a question there. So I'm thinking what we'll do is we'll have people, post their questions there, and I'll grab some questions and pose them to the audience. Sorry, I'm asking a question. Thank you, Amy. So we're gonna just give that a minute to roll in. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'm gonna ask everybody on the panel to recommend quickly one thing that they think that someone can do to help them learn something, or some advice you would give to somebody looking to get into this industry and pipeline. So if everybody could just give one quick example of something they can do today, that'd be awesome. I know, I should have put that on the doc.
Just trying to think of something we haven't said.
It can be something that was said already. I'm thinking just tangible points. Let me give an example. So
yeah, sure.
I recommend picking up the Pragmatic Programmer and going through it. I think it will give you a great background on, various aspects of writing code that I think are just universally useful.
Since the amount of topics is so broad, I think maybe it's worth starting to pinpoint some areas and departments that are super interesting to you. And I think that helps make things less intimidating. So if you're interested in rendering, if you're interested in rigging, if you're interested in animation or anything, and then from there, maybe picking a project that you can keep kind of expanding on, like get a project that has a little bit of runway that you can kind of keep building, and maybe it becomes a tool that you use all the time in your daily workflows. Maybe it kind of leads you into something else.
Yeah, I have one piece of advice, which I don't know if it's exactly what the question was, but I've noticed, like in my own experience and from what I've heard from other people on the panel, is that most of us didn't actually start out in pipeline roles. We started out as render wranglers or PSTs, which is like data wranglers. So if you want to be a pipeline TD, my advice is to get your foot in the door any way you can. You don't have to start as a pipeline TD at a studio. You can start as something else, and then it's very common for people to move from a different position into a pipeline TD role at a studio, because if you've been in another role, you have experience, you at least have an idea what the tools in the studio, how things work, then you can move from there.
Yeah,
I was going to say, oh, sorry, go on, Melissa.
Just on that note, when I was a render wrangler, and I had not originally anticipated going into like a software engineer or TD role. I wanted to be a compositor when I first started, but then what I found was that I was spending my free time as a render wrangler automating my job because it felt like very repetitive. It was renders and data, and so I already had learned some C++ in school, kind of transferred that to Python, and essentially started doing the job of a TD before being a TD. Like at that time, VR was really big, and I sort of was somehow embedded myself into making like tools for our VR pipeline, which didn't exist. And because it didn't exist, it kind of had an opening for me to sort of be like, I'm the one who's going to, you know, do this. And I don't know about every studio, but at least at Digital Domain, if you're like this, the person who's like, oh, I see a need and I'm going to do it, then you can, you know, you can make progress that way. So that's my advice. It's kind of like start doing the role even before you get the role, and that's some way to get the role officially.
I think my advice briefly is to solve someone else's bug. It's a very different experience, I think, just solving a bug in something else, something that you've written. So if you haven't had the chance before, you know, find any open source project, to that conversation we had earlier, even very simple ones. Look for an open issue, even if you don't contribute it back, right? Like just going through the exercises of like grabbing a code base that you don't know, trying to reproduce an issue, trying to figure out the code path that gets to that issue. You know, it's a I don't know, valuable skill, and it helps you look at your own code in a different way, I think, as well.
Yeah, I was going to tie it back to the open source thing, and I was actually going to go one step even simpler, and that's even just building a library and using it in some interesting way, whether that's you know, color space stuff with OpenImageIO or with USD, and you know, just prove that you've been able to download, build a library, and then use it in a package like Maya, etc., to kind of like just, you know, show an interest and show that you've been able to use it in some interesting way. I think that you know, removes any sense of it being like a big hill to tackle or anything like that, and just kind of giving it a try. And that yeah, like I like to see that in interviews. Like we use USD throughout our pipeline, so if someone's just shown an interest and been able to build it, and then they've said, look, I built this plugin, I was able to get this data from Maya over to USD, and I converted it like this, and you know, I think that's shows really good enthusiasm in the space as well.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We're going to turn now to some user questions. So I hope I'm pronouncing these names right. I apologize if I'm not. Kyra asks, it's difficult to find experience in pipeline development for VFX and animation. What would be outside experience that could help a person break in?
I feel like like almost any other engineering position is valuable experience. But maybe more specifically, at least for me, I find that actually DevOps kinds of roles, or roles where you get to touch more than just like a Jira ticket and a code base, but you actually get a broader set of skills around like, you know, tying different code bases together, or, you know, you're also interfacing with users, you're also, you know, just like having a mix of skills rather than just like a purely software engineering focused job is valuable.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky, it's like a chicken and egg problem, especially with students coming out of school directly into the industry. But I think it's really, we can quickly see, I think, if you know Python or if you have any sort of kind of initial kind of technical experience, but being able to demonstrate that you've worked in group projects before, that you've contributed to a larger code base in some way. A lot of the questions that I ask, by the time you get to me in an interview panel, I'm not really asking any technical questions. I'm asking more kind of the soft skill questions. So thinking about how you can, on top of learning Python, I think demonstrating those soft skills in some way, group projects, open source contributions, something like that.
Awesome.
I was also going to speak to the like the customer service side of the TD roles as well. That at the end of the day, we are kind of working with users and helping to solve their problems. And there's a lot of jobs out there that are not specifically in the VFX industry, but are in that kind of service related, like helping people with things. And that's a really kind of important area. And we've hired people that have been, you know, really very skilled in that area and really good kind of communication skills, but have actually never done any programming before, but keen to do so. And we can teach those kind of skills if you have the keenness and the communication skills on that side, as well as, you know, someone who's been a really skilled developer, but less so in the communication, then, you know, we can kind of work on either side of that kind of thing.
So I got two more questions here that I'm just going to kind of combine them together because they're similar. You know, what sort of personal projects stand out to you and you want to see in a portfolio if it doesn't exist? And if someone is submitting some sort of portfolio, what's the best way to do it? Is it GitHub?
I can say for my part for sure, like GitHub is obviously the most common one that I see. But I will also say, like, you know, it's kind of to what Will is saying as well. Like, there's actually, I don't know how to put this, like in a good way, but like also just saying, like, I don't, when I'm reviewing portfolios, I don't typically spend that long looking at code bases, in the sense of like a lot of what I'm looking for, I gather fairly quickly, which is like, are you, you know, documenting your code really well so that, you know, like, you know, it's the point of like sharing, having a shared code base and stuff like that, right? So are you like shepherding your projects well? Are you putting other infrastructure around it, like to help make it easy to build? Yeah, does it have a README? Is it documented? Is the code structured in a way that I can look at it quickly and understand it? If I can't take 5 minutes and get a good grok of the lay of the land of your code base, then it tells me a lot about just like, you know, the structure and stuff like that. I think realistically, there's only so much you can show of a project like that. But outside of that, I will also say any other material helps. You know, like if you make a game or something, you know, include a GIF of what it looks like when it's running and things like that, just so it's like it actually shows the full project without the expectation that somebody will download the whole thing and run it on their local machine, because that might not happen just due to time constraints and other things like that, right? So, yeah, and anywhere accessible. GitHub's fine, but any URL I think is reasonable.
For the types of projects, the projects that always stand out to me are ones where the person presenting the work is thinking about the pipeline kind of holistically. Like I've seen some student projects where a student was like, oh, I need to run a sim in my animation scene, and I subprocess that out, or I figured out a way to I'm using a limbic to move my data from one software package to another. Like seeing examples of solving these kind of same real world problems that you would encounter in a studio environment, just at a personal scale. I think seeing stuff like that is always really refreshing, and it shows that you're thinking about problems as an artist and not just checking off features to say like, oh, this feature technically works, right? There's some personal experience in there. That stuff stands out to me a lot.
And kind of along those lines, like I think get being detailed, and if you're writing the resume and like talking about what you did, don't just be like, I wrote tool for exporting. Like, you know, be specific. You know, a tool for exporting Alembics out of Maya during this, you know, you know, and being more specific, it kind of gives us something to like ask about in the interview. And yeah, and similar to things people said earlier about like kind of soft skills as well. Just think about like different, you know, roles you've had and how, if you think about it, like those skills are transferable in a lot of ways. Maybe in a group project, you were the one who was, I actually had this question when I was first interviewed about like whether I had led a group project, and I was like, no, because I was not officially the leader. But then when I like really thought about it after, I was doing a lot of the organizing of that project, and there were a lot of things to think about there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just re-emphasize that point too. Like if you share a project, like also tell us why you're excited about it. You know, what is it about this project that you built that like was the most fun or the most exciting or that you're the most proud of? All of those things are way more telling than the project itself.
Awesome. Cool, guys. So I got a bunch of questions here, but we don't have that much time left. So I'm just going to grab the ones that, you know, I think they're all great questions. Let me see if I can find one that I think would fit well into the time frame here. All right. If somebody wants to start in pipeline work, but later wants to return to more general software engineering, what paths have you seen that work well? So, and I'm assuming that means like transitioning from like a pipe TD role into a more core pipe engineering role. So what paths have you seen?
I mean, I think that's pretty common, actually. That's certainly what happened for me. And a lot of people that I've worked with have gone from sort of a show support pipeline role to migrate eventually towards a more software development role. It's really pretty common.
Yeah, as someone speaking for myself, I've gone from pipeline to R&D software to pipeline to software. I think, you know, communicating what you're interested in. People won't know unless you tell them. If you're interested in a certain area, yeah, I think generally people want you to be happy when you're working with them, and they want you to work on things that you want to work on. You're going to do better work if you are interested. So it can't always work out depending on this, you know, situation. But if you first off just communicate that, that would be a big step.
Yeah, I also find most of these roles are actually quite fluid in the sense like, you know, like the breadth of pipe TD can go from very support heavy to very dev heavy, and often in the same studio, just depending on what people are like, you know, really into and interested in. And so it's almost like you can just keep moving in whichever direction you're happiest with.
And it'll change over the lifespan of a show too, right? At the beginning of the show, you're writing a lot of tools, you're not doing much support, but at the end of the show, you're doing much more support and less development. So
Yeah, I did that transition several years ago, going from pipeline to software engineering. And for me, I became very interested in one particular area of our pipeline, and I really focused on it and became the subject matter expert in that area. And that's kind of what led me into the role I'm in now. So, you know, picking something that you're very interested in and becoming very focused on it is something that can as long as you don't neglect your other duties, of course, can really help you with that transition. Oliver, sorry, I saw you unmiked there. Did you want to add anything?
I was, and then you kind of answered it. No. But yeah, I suppose I can add a bit more in that there tends to be like two different directions that TDs can kind of move upwards or onwards with, and one of them is into more of a developer role, and then the other direction is more into a leader / organizing / role. And so going to a lead TD and then supervisor, CG supervisor, VFX supervisor tends to be a direction that we see people going in, which can be kind of orthogonal to the direction of going into being more of a you know, like a head down developer rather than, you know, a general communication role, and they're both like very valid, and it really depends on the person and the interest that they have. And yeah, I was going to reiterate what you said, James, that finding something that you're really passionate about, and then going really deep in it. That's the finding the depth rather than the breadth would help for getting you into a specific kind of software role. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. I think we got time to fit one more question in. So what traits do you see in pipe DDs who do really well? And what types of working styles might find the role more difficult?
I think people who are very organized and detail oriented tend to be good in pipeline. I find in pipeline at DD, you know, we're more and more like everything is config based. You know, when you write code, you want things to be very configurable because this will work for this show. The next show is going to be a little different. And just sort of designing your code to be flexible, you know, easy to extend later. That's kind of, yeah, that's been good.
I'd say a real passion for helping people. So when you fix something and see that either an individual or a department is now running much better because of a change that you've made, and like having the thrill of like, wow, like I actually helped these people do something, and you know, getting a thrill from that is a really good thing.
Yeah, and you can kind of reverse any of those too, right? And like I have seen people who I have personally hired in past roles that ended up moving on because it wasn't really a great fit. It's usually because they really value like a lot of time to work on really difficult problems and a lot of space to themselves, which is a very valuable person to have in a software engineering type role, but in a pipe DD role, it doesn't fit super well because you're always having to change contexts. You're always having to, you know, get pulled into something that's higher priority and put things down and pick them back up again. And it's a lot of that kind of juggling.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. One of the questions that I ask in interviews is 3 different people all give you top priority tickets. How do you determine which is the most top priority? And it's in the support role, you have to be really, really proactive. You have to be able to triage problems yourself really quickly, understand scope and understand scope, complexity, understand risk. There's like all these different variables that you're kind of keeping in your head. So someone who kind of thrives in an environment that you're moving between problems quickly, you don't get stressed out when a couple different things land on your desk, and also you're fine with not knowing everything. That, going back to one of the earlier topics, is always being a lifelong learner. I think is absolutely crucial. If you just want to be an expert at that and you cap out everything and you're like, I have learned everything there is to learn, then this probably isn't good for you.
Cool. As we close, I just want to say, you know, I find that a good attitude to have when you're a pipe TD is that I remember a VFX super said to me once, you know, we're making movies, we're not putting people on the moon. So being able to stay calm under pressure and, you know, keep things in perspective, because as a pipe TD, you encounter a lot of different problems and it might seem like the end of the world as you're trying to fix them, but, you know, you're just making movies. So I just want to thank our panelists for, you know, coming and giving their knowledge to everybody. So thank you guys very much. Thank you to the DPPA for organizing this, and everybody for coming. I hope you got something out of it. if you have any more questions, feel free to join the Discord. I don't know if you guys can see the link, but I'll try to find a way to get it sent out to everybody. So that way you can continue to ask your questions. Hopefully Amy's Renegade video worked. And if so, we'll find a way to get that out too. So again, thank you all very, very much, and have a great night.